Thank you very much, Yola, for introduction, and thank you very much to Pirja and all the EuroAgeism team for inviting me to speak at the seminar. I will not be speaking about our population unit activities. Actually, this leaving no one behind is a principle in the major UN worldwide policy framework that we are now engaged for 15 years since 2015. It is transforming our world, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is the principle behind that agenda. That's why I put it on here. It sounds kind of general, but it is at the core of it. So this agenda, 2030 Agenda, and how we can kind of seize the opportunity and to see where one can address the aging policies and address the aging issues in itself. I will say why we need to think about it, but also this is an opportunity to see how to build in this combating ageism in their all worldwide agendas that also go down. They start from grassroots, but also go down from the top to the grassroots. And they are based on the commitments of the policymakers, and on the commitments of the civil society, on the commitments of researchers and academic community. So every stakeholder is involved in that. So this agenda is for the people. This is the core, again, in the preamble of it, that we want to determine the end of poverty, but also the very important element is to ensure that all human beings can fulfill their potential in dignity and equality and in a healthy environment. So here it's already all the basis to address ageism here. For the planet, we want that all the developments are not destructing, not degrading our planet. For the prosperity, we want that all human beings would enjoy their prosperous and fulfilling lives, but in harmony with their nature, in harmony with our planet. In peace, without which we cannot achieve anything practically. We need to have this universal peace that helps us to advance and change and then to transform our world. And in partnership. Without the partnership, without the participation of all countries, of all governments, of all academics, of all civil society, everyone, we cannot achieve this. Sustainable development is a core, and we know many things behind it that are so important. So my talk today is on this kind of global political agenda that can give a space and can give a room to address also ageism. Before I go further, I was just thinking about when listening to Liat, listening to Maria and to others, and I was remembering Professor Voppel, the leading demographer, who, first time I think I heard him 20 years ago, who said that, and who actually worked on the data of on Swedish data, and predicted that our life expectancy will be growing non-stop. Maybe with little curves, but will go up further and further. And he said that, you know, everyone wants to live long, but no one wants to be old. And I think this is the core of ageism as well in it, but it is inherent truth. We all want to live long, to achieve more, to reach for better, but we don't want to think about us being old. And even today, when we talk about ageism, we talk about this inherent, intrinsic kind of bias towards it, but we have. So going back to my presentation, I must say that in that agenda, 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, when it was negotiated and when it was discussed, it took 5 years to come up with it, in a way. It was 193 countries that subscribed for it at the summit in September 2015. with 150 presidents and prime ministers being present at that point. This preamble with the principles, but also with their 17 Sustainable Development Goals that touched on the core elements according to that point, what they discussed and what they saw. And then the kind of moment was that everyone tried to take part of it, again into silos movement, what they can implement or what they would like to see in each of these goals, but not really the all continuum, all the intersection of all these goals. Because when it was conceived to have all the continuum and all the intersections. But in the end, usually it goes to the kind of details. This and that, we look at the climate change, we look at the energy, we look at the water and sanitation, we look at the inequalities, but all these things are interrelated, and one has to keep it in mind. On the other hand, one wanted to have all the time something that is referred to your core interest. And the older age, older people, the NGOs raised a big flag at that time that the older persons and age is very little represented in these goals. In fact, it's only in 5 targets that the older persons or age is mentioned at all. So from the society, from the community that works on aging issues, it seemed that it was overlooked. But in principle, it's not. You can take these 9 goals, let's say, that we picked up during our policy seminar that we organized in November last year. And my presentation, I must say right away, will be based on that policy seminar that we organized for member states, for the intergovernmental body of the Working Group on Aging, and the civil society and some academics present at that time. That it's not only these 5 specific targets out of 169 targets on the SDGs that are addressing, but at least 9 out of 17 can be directly linked to it. But how to link them, it's another part. So an important element here, I would say, how you address these things. Or you go and look just directly for these 5 targets, let's say poverty in old age, or the housing, transport and housing for the adapted to the older age, or that one of it's 11.2 and 11.7 targets in the SDGs group. Or you take inequalities which are across, or you take any discrimination that are based on age, sex, etc. But Liet mentioned the 70 years old Declaration on Human Rights that omitted age at that time. Now age is already included. And in that goal, is clearly it even starts with the age. That is indiscriminatory of age, sex, birth, etc. All the elements are mentioned. So you can take these 5, you can take all goals and see where your existing policies or where your existing interest is and try to see how it links. Or you can take all 17 goals, all the agenda, and see how you can use it to advance your ideas, to advance your aims. And I think combating ageism can be this third way, the third element, that through all those goals, through all the ideas, you can try to penetrate it, to kind of mainstream it into. That would be an idea. Now, briefly, I will go goal by goal, just to show you the linkage with the old age or the policies on aging. Just briefly, not stopping long, but you can ask me questions later on, but I hope that it will speak to you. First, no poverty. No poverty, if you have as a goal, it's to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. In the bold, I put the actual goal On the top line, I put to you what can be, how we can address the aging. I'm not talking here about ageism. I'm talking about ageism, aging policies, aging issues altogether. So we can think about adequate pensions to ensure their societies are free from the old age poverty. This is an important element. It's not mentioned in the goal or in the specific target, but this is how we can think through and how we can put our ideas into it. Social protection systems that encompass the needs, capacities, and expectations of older persons. We have social protection flaws mentioned, but it's not exactly the same when we look through the older age. The next one, the most familiar probably for many of you, is the good health and well-being, which is kind of, we have also custodians for these goals, and World Health Organization is a custodian, intergovernmental level custodian for this goal. They also have to report and then work on it. So there are also, the old age is not included as in any target as specific, but it is important here through. And how we can look into it, we can see through tailored care. We can think through the maintaining dignified and independent living that can be put into our policies into it, and also when we address physical, mental, and social well-being elements there. So there is a room to work on it through our policies and see how they fit or how to improve them. Very important goal that relates to Kai's presentation, I would say very much. And I come back to it afterwards on one practical example. It's the lifelong learning. The goal is on the ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities to all. And here, lifelong learning as a part of the life course approach, it's extremely important element. But you will see that it's not always understood and not always used even in because it is a custodian here, it's UNESCO. It's a group that works on the UNICEF and UNESCO, the two of them. They work on this, but they work through the young age, through the first education, through the education primary up to tertiary. And when it comes to the lifelong learning, it's mainly vocational retraining on jobs, but does not go far enough. While we can add to it as a community working on these questions. Gender equality. Here I think I don't need to expand a lot, because we know that the cumulative effects of their unequal treatment, of their pay gap, of their access to some facilities, to some careers, etc., may have a big impact. And if we don't address them in due time, we cannot resolve them at the old age. You cannot address the pay gap issue throughout the period of your early life only with the old age pension. It will never compensate for it. So we have to think for it. And we have to see on how to value the unpaid care, how it should be included, how to prevent violence against older women, not only against women of their younger age. Whose presentation was that showed this violence element? I think Juliet mentioned, no? That when we talk, it was this attitude that only younger women are more prone to the violence. It's not really true, in fact. And reducing gender inequalities and discrimination across the life course. Now, decent work and economic growth. Sometimes we heard today that, okay, productivity is lower with the older age, etc. But if we provide the decent environment, if we recognize the potential and invest into that potential of all the people, it becomes a productive work. And we had also with the previous speaker who said that sometimes with the older age, even if you are working slower, maybe you achieve you show slower results, but your results might be much more important and higher because of your knowledge, of your acquired knowledge, of your seniority, that you know how to deal with it. And we have a lot of good practice examples. I'm not going into it. Labor market policies promoting safe, age-friendly work environment, and looking especially for flexible policies on retirement, having for flexible retirement opportunities. I hear about good Swedish examples when you can re-retire. So, and some countries also do this now, try to experiment with it. Can you go back when you already retired for several years and then you decide to go back? And the company sometimes might be very interested to have you back because you took away certain knowledge so that you can fill the gap in the certain knowledge chain of the company. And not only that, also part-time work, which is an important element, and community work, how to recognize it. Reduced inequalities, this is very direct in a way, and we have here also age mentioned in at least 2 targets where it is directly addressed. But if we try to design social protection policies that reduce inequalities across life course, this would be the greatest achievement. And that is an example of gender inequalities that I said. But it's not only that. It's also people with disabilities, it's also some minorities, migrants. You take any more vulnerable group that it is prone to this compound throughout life course inequalities. Empowering all the people, individuals, to contribute more. Yola mentioned we work on the active aging index, and we have this kind of, that index tries to show how much all the people contribute to society, that we often don't recognize, even when they not in the paid employment or when they are not really volunteering or doing grandparenting or caring for, but if they manage their autonomous living, if they make an effort to be healthy, if they make an effort to involve in the lifelong learning, into learning new techniques, even though I think I would say it's again these requirements, requests on the individuals. I think, but this is already a contribution that we have to acknowledge that these people contribute. Age-friendly cities and communities, this is very close, especially for the age-friendly communities. Age-friendliness, it's not only, and this is again, I can really relate to Leah, saying that this does not benefit only older people. It benefits the young as much. Take mother with a pram, who uses the low platform bus to get onto it. It's not only for when you think about age friendliness, it's not only for the older, but also for person with disability or person with a pram or with even your shopping cart if you need to get in your age of 40, or you are on your crutches after your skiing accident. It's also helpful for the young as for the old. The element of the urban-rural divide, it is an important element, and especially in this area, because transport there plays a big role with the access possibilities. Because in rural areas, people have to drive or have to go further to get access to the health facilities, to the government facilities, and etc. It's not as easily accessible as they are in the urban areas. But there are also opposite things with the clean air and the environment, green spaces, and etc. One of the targets here that refers directly to the older people is ensuring that the green spaces are available for women, children, older persons, and all others. But older persons are mentioned there really specifically in the target. 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Strong institutions are very important for everything, but here it's also elements of the violence, domestic violence, that affect older persons, neglect of not necessarily really the violence per se, physical violence, but neglect. It also, it's a strong element here that comes. effective consultations with older persons, involving older persons themselves into the process of any decision making, which is very important, and promoting non-discriminatory policies to safeguard older persons' human rights. We don't have a convention, specific convention on human rights for older persons, but human rights per se, how to safeguard them in that older age, it's an important element, and we will hear about it from the next speaker, so I will not dwell on it. Here, 17th, it's a very kind of broad goal that involves many things. But one of the elements is to have really evidence-based for the policy making, one of the goals. And that's the requirement to have much better data, to have the things that we can enhance this availability of the data that is disaggregated by age, that is disaggregated by many other elements, disabilities, etc., that we can look into person as person in the end. So that with the principle, leaving no one behind, can show up. And this is part of the accountability principle as well. And another thing, of course, is the regional strategies and cooperation that among the countries. So I put these 9 goals. I'm not going through 17, but I can assure you that if you take the goal 6 on the, let's say, on sanitation and water, it will affect ageism here as well, like in medicine, I would say. You know, when the standards for the drinkable water are, let's say, established in certain ways. There was a big study in Pennsylvania after several kind of epidemics of the older people being taken ill after the drought. And the quality of water was measured and said that it is of the standard that is endorsed. And then they couldn't understand what was going on because they had the intestinal problems. These older people, 85 and older, they were in the hospitals, many of them, during these periods. And then the only common factor was the water. They couldn't find any other common factor in it. And it turned out that when the standard was established, the age limit, what was taken into account from because it takes health data and etc., was 60. Nobody beyond 60, the illnesses, etc., were not taken into account. Waterborne in these illnesses, etc. So that standard apparently excluded, like your colleague said, 500, 1/10 of the population, 75 plus in that polling, but there was its even bigger place. So this is an element that you can take also other goals that can come. Now how their accountability and reporting is coming on. So these are goals established at the worldwide level. Then the countries so-called nationalize those goals. They look through the goals and they look into it, what is the most important priorities in their country level. So this nationalization comes at the target level, can come at the indicators level, and etc. So the reporting is at the national level and then to the global level. At the national level, most of the countries developed since 2015 their national sustainable development strategies, and practically all European countries have it. We looked into few. We had the countries reporting to us how these strategies were established, how these goals and targets were nationalized, who had an impact deciding on it, and how these reports are prepared. And is there a space, is there a room for those who work on policies on aging, or in that, let's say also ageism? Can they impact? Did they have an impact? So I give you just 2 examples. First example is Armenia, that already prepared 3 reports, national reports to the high-level political forum, which meets every year, and how the process is organized, and where the room to participate. Is that a really participatory approach or not? And in practice, it is. It's a small country, and the participatory approach was used through the lower level, through the platform, innovation lab, so-called, which really got a lot of expertise from different stakeholders, and also at that level, middle level, where the 4 working groups were established, taking government representatives, but also NGOs. But then, when you go which NGOs took part, which ministries took part, it became a bit more blurred. But in principle, the participatory approach in this institutional framework was used. There were some other countries where it wasn't, where it was just the president, his cabinet, and a couple of experts who worked on it. So this is one of the, not the best maybe, but quite a good example. More complicated example is a German example. I didn't translate all these details, but Germany, as you know, is quite a complicated country altogether. So it's also very, in a way, participatory approach, but you have federal level, you have lands level, you have the different levels where the complication comes in, and the result is sometimes can be questionable. So German national strategy, I took it as a quick example for you. What aging-related aspects were in that? You had main core that, of course, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Labor came into quite strongly. You have the on sustainable public finances, law to strengthen occupational pensions. That was among the priorities. Ministry of Health also had its say, and it was on the life of longer, healthy lives to reduce proportion of smokers and obesity, etc. So it was addressed, but across the ages. It was not just for the younger age group. Now, when we come to the lifelong learning, actually, when we looked into the strategy and into reporting, it ended at 34, age 34. So it seems like lifelong learning does not extend further, at least in the priorities. It's not necessarily in the reality, but in the priorities does not seem to extend much further. And increase the proportion of older persons in employment, that is Labor Ministry. Now we work with a ministry that is in charge of senior policies. It's a complicated title. It's a ministry for the senior policy, for family, women, senior policies, children and youth. So it's a very complicated. And that ministry practically didn't manage to put any priority on the older persons. They put the gender equality and children, but nothing on the older persons. And that was, for us also, we were discussing it with the ministry about it, why it didn't go into the top layer as one of the priorities. So just to go closer to conclusion of my speech here, do we have the potentials? Do we have a potential to include the aging policies, but also to that effect also aspects on combating ageism? And I think we do, and we do through several means. And first of all, if we try increase visibility of aging-related policies and addressing ageism, it would be an important element, and here you will play quite an important role. The younger generation, older generation, intergenerational aspects. Use consultation processes better to gain the attention. This is an important element, to involve all stakeholders, to involve private sector, to involve not only academia, among academia, not only special events for the stakeholders, but try to involve even in the research process. It's an important element. And to measure and report the progress. This is also a part and a stage where quite a big impact can be done. If the countries, while reporting further in their voluntary national reports, would include some data, some qualitative elements, some statements that regard these aspects, it would already work for us. What's next this year? As I said, these are two levels, national level and global level. But as Economic Commission for Europe, as a regional commission, we have our regional level, even though countries are not obliged to report to us. This is a part of that global agenda that was global and national, not going at the regional level. But after 3 years of the agenda working, member countries say, no, we need this regional element here because in the region we have more commonalities, closer relations, so for us it's more important to speak among ourselves and to share good practices, because when you come just to the high level, when you have 2,000 presentations during 3 weeks of the meeting in New York, side events, and etc. So it's not enough. So we are organizing regional forum for sustainable development every year prior to the high level. And that forum allows for the peer learning. We have just roundtables for the peer learning and focus group discussions. It's a day and a half. We have 2 sessions for the high level, but it is 3 hours altogether. So these are 2 events that will be coming this year. If you are interested to know about the program, and actually you can take part if you're interested in the regional forum, you have to register for it and pay for coming. Not for the participation, but for the Geneva. You are very welcome. And you can find all the material under these links. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vitalija. Is there any, that's now the time for focus. Right, please.
Thank you. It was really, really interesting. And I'm wondering if you think it would have been better to have a sustainable goal in the form of age, or do you think it's better to show how age is kind of a thread throughout, from a policy perspective? How do you think we could advance the topic better?
This discourse was very hot at one point in 2015, and I think the outcome is better than if it would be just one goal. Because it's very difficult to put into one goal everything. You know, you would have health, you would have housing, you would have water sanitation. So it would be, I think as you said, we all go through that pyramid. We may be just women or men, maybe mixed sometimes, but we may be black or white or some, but age we go across. So I think not having a specific goal in the end was a good outcome, because you can go through, but it involves much more, you need to be much more active to pursue. That's another part.
Yes, but you will have less time for presentation.
Continuing on this aspect, and what about the targets that could be, because you mentioned there are only 5 targets explicitly focusing on aging. At the same time, as you said, there is now this, let's say, will to include older people in statistics, so there will be more actual data in relation to aging. Is there at any point a possibility to review those targets in mid, let's say, term when implementing the goals? Is it something which is an open still, or are targets fixed as they are for the moment?
Well, as far as I know, they're fixed. The high-level political forum may come to other decision maybe at some point. Actually, this year there will be the first quadrennial report on the implementation. They may see that there is something missing or something lacking there. Maybe there is a part of their possibility to negotiate. But I haven't seen the, let's say, mechanism inbuilt to change them.
Because if I may, I still think that this is a challenge for us when we discuss how to combat ageism effectively. Yes, 5 targets only, then of course I agree with your point when you say across life course perspective we can touch up on different aspects in relation to old age with other dimensions, but still, you look at the youth, children, they are more visible in the policy agenda, and this is where I think ageism, and by the way, I will come to this also in my presentation, I think it's one of the challenges that policy making is still far from some aspects, specifically in relation to aging. I think this is not visible enough. But
I'm not saying that it is visible enough. I was also among those who were in the beginning saying that we need to have, and it would really make my life much easier. Because we have to report on the implementation of the goals, and when they ask me to write a report, I say, which goal you want me to write? I have to write about across all 17, and I cannot. I'm only one. So, you know, it's a different, if I would have it, it would be much easier and it would be more focused. But how to include all of them, it would be more I think by having one, you may be more excluding than including in certain elements.